Hello everyone, TimeToGrind here, and today I wanted to take an in-depth look at the offensive class as a whole. Now, a lot of players have a hard time figuring out when and why they should play specific heroes, so they tend to just play whoever they want to play at that moment, and that's fine for a little unless you want to do as well as you possibly can. And in competitive mode, if you want to do the best you can, then learning when and why to pick certain heroes is crucial. So today I'm going to look at each offensive hero and give a little insight into when you should pick them, along with why you should pick them. And of course, sometimes things change balance-wise, like how much damage a hero does or how fast their cooldowns are, but that doesn't really change the overall reasons why you should pick specific heroes. So without further ado, let's get started. So before we look at each hero specifically, I want to kind of define two different types of offensive heroes that I see. Firstly, you have the flankers, which are great at getting behind the enemies and harassing and killing off enemies one at a time, and also fighters, which are great at actually being in the middle of team fights and do really well being surrounded by a team. And yes, that was the best name I could come up with. Now, of course, not every single offensive hero will fit into one of these two categories, and some may fit into other smaller categories defined in a million different ways, but those are just the two main ways that I kind of define them by. So first off, Genji is a great flanker and utility hero. Like most flankers, he excels at being able to harass and take out lower health heroes and heroes like Widowmaker or Hanzo who aren't normally close up to their teams. Now of course, Genji also excels at fighting heroes with projectiles, as his reflect can be ridiculous. Now I know a lot of people tend to just pick Genji right off the bat as an assault hero without really thinking, because Genji's the cool cyborg ninja guy that everyone drools over, and don't get me wrong, he's freaking cool, but he is definitely not the best pick in a lot of situations. If the enemy team has heroes like Mei, Winston, Zarya, Symmetra, or even Farrah that have weapons and abilities that are really hard or impossible to reflect, you're gonna have an extremely hard time. And on top of that, Genji can struggle pretty hard against tankier teams, as his abilities aren't the best for dealing with them. Now you do want to pick up Genji against teams that have a lot of projectile-based assault heroes, or just heroes with lower health pools in the first place, because flanking those types of heroes can work out really well. And also, if for whatever reason you're on a team that is in need of assault heroes, Genji isn't always the best, because although his damage output can be high, it can be sort of hard to utilize him well in teamfights in comparison to other assault heroes. So he's a great flanker that struggles with tankier heroes and heroes that aren't necessarily projectile based. Next we have the good ol' McCree, and thank God he just got nerfed before I made this video, because otherwise I would have had to just say always pick a McCree no matter what. But now he actually has strengths and weaknesses, and it isn't always just the best to pick up a McCree. McCree is great, and I mean great against lower health heroes. His flashbang into Fan the Hammer can easily insta-kill lower health heroes, and because of his ability to lock down lower health heroes, picking up a McCree against a team that has a lot of supports or just a lot of squishy heroes is great. McCree is probably one of the best bullies towards supports in the game, actually in terms of offensive heroes, because everyone can focus down and kill a support, but McCree can stun them, preventing them from ulting, escaping, or even helping out their other teammates. McCree is also amazing against heroes with escapes like Tracer or Reaper, since many of your teammates won't be able to deal with their escapes, but you can. What's great about McCree is he is a great fighter, as in the middle of team fights he can stun enemies, which, by the way, if you didn't know, stunning someone in the middle of 100 projectiles can be pretty good. You can also pick up a McCree if there are things further away that your teammates can't really reach, like turrets, snipers, or even Farrah. So McCree is great against supports, heroes with escapes, and heroes that tend to be unattached from the main team, but suffers heavily against tankier heroes. Next is Farrah, and Farrah is a pretty interesting specimen when it comes to the assault heroes, because she can be great at singling out targets by flanking a little bit, but she can also be amazing in the main team fights as long as she isn't in the center of them. First off, Farrah is single-handedly one of the best assault heroes to take out supports in my opinion, because most of the time supports are going to be in the back of a team, many times hidden by a Reinhardt shield or something like that, but with Farrah you can just fly right over it all and just focus the supports. But she can be absolutely destroyed by teams with lots of range and heroes with hit scan weapons, like Soldier 76 and McCree. What is also great about Farrah is she can actually deal with tanks very well, as most tanks don't have much range, and by firing from above, they can't really get you themselves, except of course Roadhog. Now, one of the things I don't tend to see a lot in a lot of matchup guides is the concept of environmental kills. Farrah can be a beast with environmental kills by pushing off enemies off the map. And control maps tend to have a lot of ledges. On top of all of that, Farrah is great against heroes that don't actually fire projectiles or fire projectiles with little range, like Mei, Junkrat, and Winston. So overall, it's great to pick up a Farrah if the enemy team has multiple supports, heroes with little range, and tanks. And if the map has ledges, but it isn't always the best idea to pick her up if the enemy team has a lot of hit scan weapons and weapons with very long range. Next we have Reaper, and Reaper can be amazing in a ton of different circumstances because he is an amazing flanker and an amazing fighter due to his kit. Although there are multiple other flankers, Reaper can easily be the best at it due to the fact that he can get behind enemy lines completely undetected. If you're on a hard to pass choke point like the first part of King's Row, you can easily get to a position where you can teleport behind the enemy and then wreak havoc. Whereas if you were Genji or Tracer, you would still have been seen. So because of that, it's great to pick up a Reaper if you're on offense on a map with a really hard to pass choke point. Also, just like most flankers, Reaper is extremely good against lower health heroes, which includes most of the supports. The amazing thing about Reaper though is that on top of being a great flanker, he is also amazing in teamfights. Since most teamfights tend to be a little closer combat than a lot of the other parts of the game, Reaper's shotguns can just melt enemies. And because his shotguns can melt heroes extremely fast, he actually is extremely effective against tanks. Easily the best assault hero for killing off tanks. The one main problem with Reaper is he gets absolutely destroyed by fighter heroes that have range. So not Widowmaker, but heroes like McCree and Farrah can absolutely destroy you as Reaper. So you normally want to pick up a Reaper if you're against a team with a tankier lineup, or if you're on offense and really need to get through a choke point. However, you normally don't want to pick up a Reaper if the enemy team has a lot of long range weaponry. Next we have Soldier 76. Now Soldier 76 is a pretty well-rounded hero, but he does have certain times when he shines, and certain times when he does not. So just like all the other assault heroes, for the most part 76 is great for fighting supports. The thing is though, is because of his range, he can many times kill supports that are further back, whereas heroes like Reaper might have a harder time. He is also great against heroes that have a harder time with range like Farrah. On top of that, he can be pretty good if the enemy team has a lot of builders or stationary heroes like Bastion, Symmetra, or Torbjorn, since your Helix rockets do a ton of damage on direct hits. However, 76 has an extremely hard time dealing with tanks. He can do a decent amount of damage, but he can't do anything against shields like Reinhardt's or Winston, and he simply can't deal damage fast enough to kill the tanks when they don't have shields. So you can pick 76 in a lot of circumstances, but he excels at killing stationary targets and supports, but you probably don't want to pick him too often if you see a lot of tanks. Now lastly, we have Tracer. Now Tracer can be a great flanker, and like we already discussed, that means she is great against supports. Man, poor supports. However, she doesn't have the best range in the world, which means she has to get up close to her targets, which makes her not the best against people that excel at close quarters combat, like McCree, Winston, and Mei. She is great at killing off people that tend to be unattached from their teams, like Widow, Symmetra, or Hanzo. And she can also be really great at control point maps because she can get behind enemy lines extremely fast and just start capping. However, because she doesn't have the biggest damage output, and she does have such a low health pool, she has a really hard time dealing with tanks like Roadhog and Winston. So in general, if you want to cap a point really fast or want to flank lower health heroes, picking up a Tracer can be great. But if the enemy team has lots of AoE damage or has a tankier lineup, Tracer isn't the best pick. Now keep in mind, the enemy team has the ability to switch heroes just like you do. So if you picked a Tracer because they had 3 Widowmakers, but they all switched over to tanks, you probably are going to have to switch as well. Being aware of what heroes the enemy team is using is just as important as actually being able to play the game. And also keep in mind, you don't always have to follow these. There are many times where exceptions can and should be made, so always use the best judgment when deciding who to play. And that's it. If you enjoyed this video, then consider leaving a like down below and subscribing to see more Overwatch content and news. And like always guys, see you next time.